You are now listening to Out of the Blank.
Welcome to another episode of Out of the Blank podcast. I'm here with, it's Yonason Goldson.
Perfect.
Look at that. Oh my goodness. I probably wouldn't be able to do that again. Well,
It looks harder than it is.
Tell me a little bit about yourself and what do you do professionally?
Well, a little bit about myself. Where to start? We'll start at the end. I taught high school for 23 years. I'm a rabbi, so I taught in a private Jewish school. Taught Jewish tradition, Jewish history, and most importantly, the values that are meant to guide us in our daily lives, so the way we interact with other people, the way that we have a meaningful and purposeful existence. And I retired 3 years ago. My school closed, actually. It was a private school, and demographics changed. We didn't serve a large enough community anymore, so I retired, had to decide what I wanted to do when I grew up. And so I wanted to take my speaking experience and my communication skills and the values and ideas that I've been teaching for many years, for decades, and translate that into a presentation to help people in the business world recognize why good ethics is good business, and understand how the way we see ourselves as part of something larger than ourselves ultimately helps us become more successful and more satisfied with our lives.
How did you decide to get into teaching and preaching, and at least about Judaism in a way?
Well, that's a long story.
Because it's very hard for a lot of people. Like, I'm not religious per se, but I'm open-minded as a person. So I understand where someone can be religious. I am jealous a little bit of the belief factor that they have with that. Just for me, I haven't, like, a lot of times you hear people that become religious, not from birth, but through experiences such as like a tragic incident, losing a loved one or something like that happened, and they turn to religion in that care. And other times you're just brought up into it. I try and be an open-minded as possible, thinking with my concept of religion is we're all have a picture of the same puzzle, just the details are a little bit different. Because everybody talks about doing good things, you go to a good place, and doing bad things, you go to a bad place. But we all hit around the same basis.
Yeah, well, that's a good starting point. And then there are so many directions we could go from here. Let me tell you how my story got started. It's a long narrative, so maybe we'll do it in little pieces and see how it goes. But I went to college at the University of California. I graduated in English, and English is a wonderful course of study. It really opens up your mind, exposes you to new ideas, teaches you the importance of communicating, the ability, how important it is to be able to communicate. But the problem is, when you graduate with a degree in English, what do you do with it?
Nothing.
So, nothing by itself usually. And so I had to decide, well, what's going to happen after I graduate? And so I decided to put it in a backpack and go hitchhiking across the United States. And I did that for about half a year. And then I crossed the Atlantic and went backpacking across Europe. And eventually I ended up in Israel. Now, it had always been my intention to go to Israel because I was Jewish. I'd been raised with no religious background whatsoever, really knew nothing about my heritage or my traditions. And I expected I'd have a classic Jewish experience by going to Israel and working on a kibbutz, a collective farm. You work a full day in the fields, you pick oranges or grapefruits. It's a nice cultural experience. And then I was going to be on my way after a couple of months to Kenya or Botswana. But something very strange happened. The dollar was at an all-time high that year. And there were millions and millions of Americans in Europe. And when it got cold in Europe, they all went south, and a lot of them ended up in Israel. And when I went to the kibbutz placement office looking to volunteer, something was going on that nobody had ever remembered happening in Israel before. There were no places available for volunteers. You couldn't give your time away. I didn't have money to just hang out, and I was kind of burned out from traveling. I wanted some routine. And so I remembered I had heard once there was something called yeshiva. It was a Jewish seminary where you could go and you could study the traditions of Judaism. And I thought, well, maybe that would give me something to occupy myself for a couple of months. And so when I went looking, and then I found my way to one of these seminaries. And I really had no intention other than to, again, occupy myself with something intellectual, have a daily routine that travel couldn't provide. But I was astonished when I got there. My first encounter was with an Orthodox rabbi. And if you're not sure what that means, you try to visualize a long black coat and a big black hat, and a scraggly beard and side locks, and he had glasses with Coke bottle lenses. And I was sure that he was just going to get up there and tell us, you're all going to burn in hell if you don't do what I say. And instead, he sounded like a college professor. And in fact, I found out later he had been one. And he was so articulate and so rational. And he just challenged my stereotypes, shattered my stereotypes, really. And I found myself thinking, this is not what I expected. This is not something that fits into my worldview. And you talked about being open-minded. I was not prepared that someone who looked like he did could sound like he did. And I decided that if I were really intellectually honest, that I had to give him the chance to make his case and hear what he had to say. And over the course of the next 2 months, with a couple of other guys who kept coming back, we just attacked him with questions and challenges and objections. And he responded to everything we had to say in a very lucid, logical, and rational way.
I've
And of
just listening to you, I mean, you're opening up my mind to a little bit more about the Jewish heritage in a way, because that's something I don't know a whole lot about. I mean, I'm so used to running across so many people just trying to force Christianity down my throat. And I'm just the type of guy, like, I'm sorry, it just doesn't work for me. I could see it where it works for you. The part I like about being open-minded is I understand it from your perspective. You know what I mean? You're coming across with it. I like that journey. I like hearing that tale for it. For me, I have no clue what would be considered, everything, whatever happens in creation and all this type of stuff. I have no clue. If I'm wrong at the end of my day, then I'm glad to know that there was something else out there. But it's only expanding my knowledge, because from the very little bit I've even looked at with Judaism, I mean, I just remember the first time I've really ever been kind of around a bunch of Jewish people was when I worked at a water park when I was around 14 years old. And they rented out the whole water park from like 5 a.m. till like 10 a.m. when the park opened, because apparently it was against their religion to see women in bikinis or something.
Yeah, the men and women typically do not go to swimming areas together as a matter of modesty. There's a certain sense of, the concept of modesty is not it doesn't purely have to do with sexuality. It has to do with human dignity, that ultimately we are souls, and our souls reside in our physical body. And the physical body should be seen as a vessel that holds something that is pure and sacred.
And that's how kind of I looked at it when my one friend that was with me was literally just like, oh, they're just not ready for it. They're just not ready to see that. And I'm like, no, it's because if you honestly look at a 15-year-old kid, he has these thoughts and he has these things, but it's best not to play into them, and having them surrounded, like how people are like every day you bump into someone, they're barely, I mean, it feels like nowadays the kids are wearing less clothing. Like you're wondering why they're experiencing more of this stuff at a younger age and everything, is because they're so just corrupted with it. That's what it is. And he was seeing it from a kind of like a I guess a strict justification. He said, oh, they're just strict. They're just strict. I was like, no, they're kind of doing it in the right way, where it's not feeding you all this information, especially at such a young age.
I'm impressed that you think that way, because we're living in a society that really is becoming so hypersexualized. And if you talk to psychologists, sociologists, there are all kinds of effects. I mean, girls going through puberty much earlier, and the lack of a commitment culture, because the cultural norms are becoming such that everything is about gratification. Everything is about, and it's ironic in a society where, we've had Me Too and we've had the feminist movement, and the whole society has intellectually moved away from the idea of physical form being the value of a person. And yet those values are much more present in the society than ever, which is a very strange paradox in our modern world.
I've talked about this multiple times. Social media and technology nowadays is going in the worst aspect of things, because I think they call it, it's just human nature. That's why, because humans are meant to kind of, no, that's an adopted characteristic that we've really picked up. Humans deep down all intentionally care about one another, but we're living in a world right now where we're so disconnected from everybody's life, like whether it's our own or whether it's a family members and the people around us, our community. It's making it so we're so easy to push people into the bus when it's coming down the street, not helping the person get out of the way. I see it every day. I see so many people just doing something on their own and totally ignoring people. I mean, I'm at fault to do it sometimes too, but not even holding the door open for some people. I always hold the door open. And if that's not good gracious for me and they go, "Oh, thank you." It's like, no, you don't need to thank me for being human. You know what I mean? Like, it's a thing, one another. We got to we're all living here together. It just makes sense that we should all kind of work together rather than try and pull ourselves apart.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right in that there is a natural human inclination to be good and tend to each other, but there's also a natural human inclination to be selfish,
Yeah.
and seek gratification. And we have both those components within us. And the question is, which one do we want to cultivate? Do we want to aspire to become more and more noble in our thinking and our speech and our actions? Or do we want to simply allow ourselves to sink to the lowest possible common denominator? And when you look at social media, it's like everything else in the world today. You've got two paths that are taking people in opposite directions. You have these, like what we're doing now, this, what they call now long form interviews or conversations. You could find really thoughtful, deep, profound ideas being discussed in interviews that go on for 1, 2, or 3 hours. And then you've got these little snippets and sound bites that at best are cat videos, and at worst are people spewing really despicable,
Hateful things.
Well, hateful things, and also coarse and corrupt things.
Well, sadly, a podcast or something like a conversation like me and you are having is not going to get on the main screen television news, right? If anything, right away, because it has no anger, nothing that people want to see. This is what I considered was popular with reality television. It was so, like a lot of podcasts you see that are on the trending charts are ones that are slapstick comedy, the ones that are all laugh out loud, like quick jokes every couple of seconds, or ones that are outlandish like politics or something that focus on like just really aggressive tactics. And that's why reality television was such a popular thing. Jersey Shore, because when you don't have that tension in your everyday life, like if you don't go out on the street and find that tension somewhere, whether it's a problem, whether it's an argument with somebody, when you go home, you look for it somewhere else, which was a big popularity with Jersey Shore, because a lot of people were just going straight home after work, not going out and doing anything. And then next, I'm flipping on Jersey Shore and I'm watching all these crazy people just start yelling at each other, and it's all an act.
Yeah, absolutely. But again, at the same time, you've got interviewers like Tom Bilyeu and Dave Rubin that are having these really thoughtful interviews, and it's a little bit worrisome, maybe more than a little bit worrisome. I mean, we certainly see it in politics, this divisiveness, that the political extremes are getting farther and farther apart, less willing to talk to each other, more eager to vilify one another, and they're dragging everyone who ought to be in the middle, forcing them to align themselves with one side or the other. And I have to be on the right, or I have to be on the left, and I have to be part of the party. But at the same time, there are those who are saying, no, let's put on the brakes. Let's be more thoughtful. Let's be more civil. Let's try to understand each other. And it's really hard to tell at this point which side is going to win out.
Yeah.
Because superficially, it looks, the loudest voices are the ones that get the most notice.
Trump, man, I'm telling you.
It's not just Trump. I mean,
I
he's
know.
part of the problem. Trump was created by the other side.
Exactly. But I don't see anybody in politics as a problem. I think what happens is he sees good publicity and bad publicity. He thinks it's all the same thing. So as long as you're even talking crap on him, you're still mentioning the name Trump. It's going to get him popular.
Absolutely.
He's a celebrity. There was a movie that looks like the way we're going to end up turning into, where they started watering their crops with Gatorade, and they had Terry Crews, the guy that does the Old Spice commercials, as their president. Like, he had 50 LMG machine guns hooked to him, and their presidential debate to decide if someone was going to get convicted of a crime was a monster truck show, and the person was tied to a boulder, and they had to run away from the monster truck. Like, that's where we're going right at this point, because we're literally we're voting for a celebrity in office. Whether that could be a good thing or not, honestly, I think having a president is probably the dumbest concept in the world. Whether you're male or female, nobody's going to do it correctly. Everybody's going to have something they hate about the person. It's one person governing so many. And we all have different views. We all don't think the same. We all have different environmental influences. This is what I learned with psychology, where I could look at somebody in the store that was really aggressive over something so stupid and not just be like, oh, that guy's an asshole. No, he's probably experiencing something going on in his life right now. And we're not problem solving as people anymore. We're not doing it correctly. We look for what I call social media as our false connectivity. The fact that we go on Facebook and immediately I'm getting drowned with everybody's complaints throughout the day about how their life, they don't have this, they don't have that, they don't have this. And then when you go on Instagram, it's the complete opposite. Instagram's what everybody has. Oh, I'm on a trip in Africa. Oh, but yeah, you see those good pictures, but they don't put up the pictures when they get back home and they're like, back to my old life, working the 9 to 5 and doing this. It's like, yeah, then people see that and they get a very bad perspective of where they need to be in their life, whether that's motivation for them to go do something, but we're not taking it that way anymore. We're taking it as, oh, I guess I'm never going to be anything. And then we go and just sleep all day. It's like, no, I'm trying my hardest to kind of I love technology as much as possible. Politics, all my views are obviously views from somebody else or someone I've talked to. And the only thing I can consider is we look at the government as being corrupt. It's not the government, it's people. We lost something along the way here as humankind, where we started putting our faith in things that we shouldn't have faith in. We're built on the foundation really, it's just rocky. I think we definitely need to start a little bit back in the beginning. I mean, in the beginning, when we're all, hunting for food and doing all these things, we learned to work together to get bigger kills to bring back more food for the tribe. And we've lost that along the way. Now it's like, we're going to kill this thing, and then I'm going to kill you, and then I'm going to bring the food back for me. It's like, whoa, come on.
Yeah, I hear. And certainly if you go back and if you read the writings that surround the foundation of the United States, the ideas of the framers, we have a vision of them as deeply religious men. And in many cases that was true, but not exclusively. Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson.
He wasn't religious at all.
I mean, Ben Franklin certainly wasn't. But they were what are called deists. They believed in God, but not in a God who was in any way involved in the world. And I think that's become a much more popular way of looking at things because it absolves one of responsibility. But even they recognize that if the people in the society don't have a common core of values and a commitment to something greater than themselves and the willingness to engage with people and work through problems to find solutions, that the nation wouldn't survive. I mean, when you look at the brilliance, I mean, whenever I start talking about the Constitution of the United States, I get choked up. It is such an extraordinary historical concept that these men put together, and they conceived an idea of, let's put our authority into a document that will preserve the values that we all agree need to be the values of a society. We're going to abdicate our power and put it in a kind of timeless document, in an objective authority that will guide the nation for generations to come. But they also recognize that people have to have a sense of higher purpose, of higher commitment, because otherwise you start using the document, you interpret it to mean what you want it to mean, you exploit it for your own purposes, and there's so much of that we're seeing now. We need to get away from this idea that I can beat you into submission with my ideas, or that I have the right to use the system to advance my own personal goals at the expense of collective values.
Yeah, I think a lot of what really is fascination with religion and why people can be so in belief of it is because it's all about mystery. I mean, you know how awesome it would be to know if there was a person out there, a being or a place that you're going to go to where you can have anything you want. And as long as you're a good person, that keeps faith for some people. The way, like people say with even being an atheist, like not believing in anything, you're just thinking when you're dead, you're dead. If that's what you want to believe, but it's way better to feel like there's going to be another place. You know what I mean? It's that mystery. It's the same reason why I love cryptozoology, Bigfoot, all these types of things. I'm not saying I believe in it, but it's a fascinating concept. It's an idea. I mean, there's 2.2 million species left undiscovered on planet Earth, on land at least, and then there's 6.5 left undiscovered in the water. And you're saying there's not maybe a species of that out there? That little thing, that little fascination that gives a little bit more mystery to that whatever being out there, that's what I find. It's like, because why would you want to say that anything is, that's fact, that's basis, it doesn't exist? Why would you want to do that? Yeah, it's okay for scientific purposes, but sadly, everything we discover 10 years later gets debunked or turns into something else. I mean, I feel like we're really just making claims on things without getting the full background and not keeping an open mind about stuff. I like to keep the inner skeptic in me, even if I'm presented with fact. I'm like, okay, well, do you see where some people would still want to believe in ghosts, even though if you don't believe in them? And they go, not really, because they're just idiots. I'm like, but then you're closing yourself off. Like, I've talked to so many people around the world. I've gotten so many. I'm like, just show me from your perspective. Just because I don't know about it yet, I'd like to learn, and it keeps me open-minded. So I start talking. I always bring up the other person's view, like someone that says something about being Jewish. Why can't you eat meat on a certain day? It's like, I don't know. I have to talk to someone that understands that. It's the basis of their religion. I have no clue. If that's what they want to do, then that's what they want to do. I'm 100% letting people, as long as it doesn't hurt anybody, do your thing.
Yeah, and so much of it comes from, as you say, having that awareness, that humility to acknowledge the limitations of what we know and what we can know. And at the same time, holding in one's mind the idea that I want to understand things to the best I can, which means I have to really, if you want to understand anything, whether it's biology or chemistry or physics or literature or history or sociology or economics or theology, you have to put in a substantial amount of time and effort to really understand. And I'm always a little uneasy about the term faith, because people misunderstand what that means. Faith is not an abandonment of reason. Faith is recognizing the limits of reason. And real faith comes after I have made the effort to understand the subject as well as I can. And I get to the limits of what I have, either the time or the intellectual ability or the available resources to understand. And then I have a certain amount of faith. What comes next? What's beyond this? And so there's that tension, as you say, between rational, empirical knowledge and the unknowable. And there's never going to be a total reconciliation between those. There's always going to be what I know, and there's going to be what I don't know. And a person who's intellectually sincere says, if I haven't made the effort to study something, I'm not really entitled to have an opinion about it. And at the same time says, if I've studied something exhaustively, that doesn't mean I know everything about it. Because as you say, science changes its mind a lot. And one new discovery, there's just a headline the other day talking about maybe Einstein was wrong about everything. Because every once in a while something comes up and challenges all of the foundational principles that physics rests upon. Maybe it's a misperception, or maybe we've discovered something that's going to open up a whole new frontier.
Yeah, so many people, like you were saying, are willing to poke holes and try and change someone. And I try and tell them that person doesn't want change. You know, obviously there's good parts when you're trying to help someone become a better person, if they're like, trying to get them on the right path of doing what we consider to be moral things. But when it comes to someone's thoughts, I'm like, the reason why that's their thoughts is because they have full control over them. You trying to force your opinions. I actually became an ordained minister under the United Church of Bacon because two priests on my local boardwalk were condemning people to hell for not believing in God. And I actually got upset with that. I actually wanted to get my major in philosophy on the concept of how far I went into parody religions. But I started looking at parody religions, and a lot of people consider them to be, I kind of want to get your opinion on this too. They considered it to be a joke on their religion. Now, do you know a lot about parody religions, or do you know any bit?
Well, not by that name.
It's more like it's kind of fictitious religion. I'll say it. I paid $45 to get my ordained minister's license. It took me an hour and a half to convince these people that the Church of Bacon was an recognized religion, but I did it. But it was under the concept of each parody religion has a really ridiculous notion to it, but it has an actual kind of educated way of looking at things. Pastafarianism is basically worshiping a giant spaghetti monster. It's okay, laugh. I laughed at it too. And then I did a little bit more research into it, and it was to highlight, in 2006, a kid from Harvard actually wanted to highlight that teaching just Christianity in a school and sticking to only Christian beliefs and not moving outside of that zone was a very, very harsh way of looking at anything. It should be open to all forms of religion and all interpretations of life. That was the deeper meaning behind it. And I read that and I was like, that makes sense. So I understood where he was kind of adding the other joking humor and stuff, the flying monster and all these types of things. But then I looked at the ordained United Church of Bacon. And I was like, okay, do they just worship bacon? And no, it was a safeguard for atheists because Christianity was forcing themselves so hard onto atheists, saying that you don't believe in God, you're going to hell. And I was like, whoa. So it was just a safeguard for them to kind of use under, so they weren't getting as cruel as punishment. And then we just had it was a couple of years ago, the Church of Euthanasia, those people that believe you should euthanize yourself. And I'm like, oh, yeah, exactly. It's crazy. But I was like, what is this? What is this going on? And they're doing the same thing Trump does, where you see something he wrote and you click into it. And next thing you know, you're like, oh my God. Well, the Church of Euthanasia, it has a good concept. They don't actually want you to kill yourself, but their message is so outlandish that you click on their page and you find out they're actually all environmentalists. They're all trying to save the earth. But you're not going to click an article about, please save the earth. You're not going to click that when it pops up in your feed. You know what you are going to click? When some person's holding up a sign saying, kill yourself for Jesus. That's what you're going to click into. I definitely did. I was like, whoa, what is this? And I clicked into it and I started reading their stuff. And I was like, okay, you guys are using a very outlandish message as a kind of and add like a capture point for an audience, like the introduction. When you get that title, it's all sparked up in front, but the inner message is actually a little bit more pure than that. And that's when I started looking at parody religions, and then looking more into all things, not just parody religions, but everything into detail. Like, I can't make a claim on something I see on the TV about some kids or something, or a shooting that happened. I have to go in and search up before I'm going to make an opinion on it. I have to talk to someone that knows about that a little bit more than me, and talk to someone like myself that didn't know anything at all. And I've through podcasting, this is where I say knowledge is power, because I've understood way more than I think I'd ever would have discovered on my own with going out into the world. Not too many people talk to one another anymore, sit down just to have an hour conversation. And once I started doing this, my own knowledge just started increasing, where I find myself in conversations. I use something I learned in a podcast, or I'll just sit there and listen and find myself being more understanding.
Yeah, I certainly understand the value of satire and of provocative titles. And one of the most brilliant satirical essays in history was Jonathan Swift wrote A Modest Proposal, where he suggested that they deal with the problem of unwanted children in Ireland and to solve the food crisis by cooking them and eating them.
Huh.
And he did it in a way that was so rationalized, was so even keeled, that he made it sound like it was actually a reasonable solution to both problems. And what he was really doing was he was satirizing those people who were doing what he was doing in a real effort to solve problems. In other words, people presenting articulate sounding solutions to problems that wouldn't work. He was satirizing them. And satire's become a dangerous device in a society that's not always so sophisticated, because sometimes people will buy into the satire without realizing it's satire.
Yeah, because they're uneducated in a little bit. I mean, if you want to say being a parody religion is kind of a satire, not me, like I don't or do all the things they do, but I think when you look at it, there's so much of it now. Like, this is kind of my theory on why Trump is such a like, a lot of people are pro-Trump when they're hardcore Christians, because there's always been two things the government really has not been able to test or has been afraid of, and that's the people and religion. It's two things. It's kind of, Abraham Lincoln said it best: "A house divided cannot stand." He learned, like, the government knows that takes the attention off themselves if they can get the public eye off of them, such as create a dispute somewhere else, create another problem somewhere else, or, do something. This happened with PETA and animal crackers. I don't know if you know anything about this, but with all the animals being behind cages and stuff, and now they're not. Well,
right.
at the time, if you look up when that incident happened, I think it was like 2014. There was a whole nother thing we were doing in Iraq and all these types of things that we shouldn't have been there doing. But PETA just attacked the animal cracker thing, and the government's like, "We'll give you this." And then PETA was like, "We got to win. We beat the government." And they went all for it. It was newspapers that were saying that. And the government just was like, slow clap in the back. Like, you want a small little tiny skirmish out of the big war here that's going on. And that's what they do. They split up the people. This is what you're seeing, like, recently with vaping and stuff. People, whatever. If honestly, it's not that big to go into, but they're getting your attention off stuff that they're doing. Because if you looked at what the government's doing now, it's not the best. I mean, with the Area 51 thing too, they were trying to get the people's attention off that. And it's like, this is what they've always been to do. But my theory on why Trump is so a lot of hardcore Christians are for him, because I've talked to Hispanic and immigrants and all these types of people that I'm friends with, that I work with, and they're making Christianity and being Catholic, which was a dominant religion in America, at least, not so dominant anymore. It's religion in a concept is not at its strongest point like it once was. You're seeing a lot more with immigration, a lot of other religions being incorporated into here. So now we're not Christianity is not the primary religion anymore. It's now, it's like, I think it's like 43% of people in America are Christians and Catholic. I think they chalk that number up together. But even wondering why all immigration's all coming in here. Now you're seeing the government's actually taking down churches now too. The one thing it was never been able to test was religion. It was never going to question that because religion was much more powerful. And now the government's taking out churches and they're building up other things. And
what do you mean they're taking out churches? What does that mean?
They're destroying them, like demolishing them, like a broken down church with, even if there's still people that are praying and worshiping there, they're just taking it out. They're building something else, whether it's I couldn't give a really good example, like a mall or something, but they've done that, I think 3 times. I know there was one in Arizona they did, and I think Virginia as well. I can't think of the third place, but it was a church. They demolished it or bought the property or something and then demolished it. I haven't seen that before throughout history, at least, unless people burned down a church or something. I don't know if you have.
I need to know what the circumstances were. I don't remember hearing about that.
But it was always kind of my theory here for why, because I've talked to a couple people that are hardcore Christians, like you have to be married before you can have kids. There's no accidental. If you do it, have a kid on accident, the next thing you know, you're going to hell. And I'm just like, why do you see this? But were pro-Trump. But I was trying to see it from both sides' perspective. A lot of people don't believe in marriage. A lot of people, they do something, and the next thing you know, they have to pay for what they did. They have kids and they're not married. And I was trying to reason with them and reason with that at the same time, my theory on why the government has only been able to be afraid of 2 things, and that's people and religion. And then seeing it kind of test religion now, because it's not as popular as it was before. And I say just people's minds are changing. We're getting so much with technology nowadays where people are becoming more atheist. We're back in the day, like scientists were all atheists. That's not true. A lot of them were actually pretty religious. But
that's true.
You're hearing so much evidence come out with, all this research and stuff. Oh, we can go into space, all this stuff that wasn't keen to us before. You're seeing religion not be as popular as it was before.
Yeah, and it's really unfortunate because in many ways, the more science discovers about the universe, the easier it becomes to be religious. Because
there's so much vast information. Before,
well, and not just that, but every discovery opens up 5, 10, 20 new mysteries. You explain one, you give one answer, and you create a dozen different questions. But there is so much in this universe that can't be explained. It often takes a lot more faith to be an atheist than it does to be religious. But ultimately, people need to believe in something. And they're going to believe in whatever makes them feel comfortable unless they start with the intellectual approach of, I want to discover basic truths in the world. And I investigate and I look and I learn science and I learn history and I learn theology and I understand what people are saying and where they're coming from and how they can back up their arguments. But that's a lot of work. Most people don't want to do that much work. So they believe in what makes them feel good. And what makes them feel good could be belief in God. That's why Marx called it the opiate of the people. And there are plenty of religious people who believe in God and the afterlife because it comforts them. There are people who believe in their nation. So you have nationalism. You have people who believe in pleasure. And so they live hedonistic lifestyles. You have people who latch on to sports teams and political parties and social movements because this gives them a sense that I'm connected to something greater than myself. And ultimately, that's the source of human happiness. When I feel that my life means something beyond myself, I expand my experience, my existence, my awareness, my sense of value, that I'm now connected to something larger than myself. And whatever is going to validate me and give me a sense of eternity, a sense of legacy, a sense of belonging, that's what I'll latch on to if I'm not willing to do the hard work of making a disciplined search for understanding what has real value and what's really worth committing myself to.
Yeah, a lot of like I can get what you're saying about with all the vast and stuff we're discovering in space and everything it would chalk up to a much higher power because you couldn't think that, a lot of people see it from, oh, we went into space, so there is no heaven. I'm like, but wouldn't that explain that there's a being out there that created this vast thing? And considering that we're only a part of a small, very, very, very minute fraction of what else is out there that we still have left to discover, it's like you open up uh, like a fortune cookie and you're about to read the fortune. Like there's always a mystery behind something. It just keeps on unraveling and unraveling. And next thing you know, there's just this vast information we still have left to explore. I'm like, that should chalk up to maybe that there was something out there like a big bang or, who created what, it brings into a bigger concept. It has that belief in there that they can't take away, but people try to.
Yeah. And when you look at, you're talking about Big Bang. Big Bang is fine, but they can't explain why it happened. They have no explanation for what came before. And often if you ask a secular scientist, what happened before Big Bang? The answer is, well, that question is scientifically irrelevant because the laws of physics only begin to operate from Big Bang. So there's nothing scientific to talk about before that, which is just a lot of words to say we have no clue. Evolution, fine. You want to believe in evolution? Go ahead. But acknowledge that spontaneous generation, my inorganic life giving rise to organic life, is something that's unexplained, that the fossil record has huge gaps in it that should be there, that aren't, that in the nature of the universe, you have something that they call dark energy, which is just another fancy way of saying something we can't understand. So we're going to put a name to it, that the universe is accelerating in its expansion when it shouldn't be. There's more gravitational influence in the universe than there should be. Call it black matter. Give it a name so now we don't have to be afraid of it anymore. There are so many things that can't be explained.
Or give it a name with like 12 syllables so you can't pronounce it.
Exactly.
So it sounds mystical.
Right. Give it a name. Now it's not scary anymore. But acknowledging, there's a great TED Talk. I forget the name of the scientist. Maybe Harry Schiff, maybe, I can't remember. He said an extraordinary thing. He said, we are just a few years away. And I thought, here we go. He said, we're just a few years away from concluding that we are never going to understand the nature of the universe. And I wanted to stand up and give him a standing ovation in front of my computer, because that kind of candid honesty that we just may never be able to figure things out, that is so refreshing.
You should see Neil deGrasse Tyson's interview on live national television where some woman's like, what is this thing? How can you explain this? And he goes, isn't it just, and then she said something and he was like, yep, I don't know. I honestly don't know. And she's like, what? But you're Neil deGrasse Tyson. He goes, yeah. And I don't know. I'm sorry. Can't give it to you. And it was funny to see her reaction because she was expecting an answer. And he was like, that's what actually inspired a meme. It's him flipping his hands back and forth. Like, I don't know. I can't explain it. We haven't found it yet. So I love how people want results, but then there's some of us that still want that belief. Like it seems like we go super, super far one way and we go super, super far the other way, but we can't just find a common ground at all, whether it's politics, whether it's anything. We always have to be, no, that can't be it. Or it has to be, just who's to say it's not a little bit of both?
And rather, finding common ground means that we find those areas where we have in common. We recognize where we disagree, but at the same time, we are willing to engage one another. I mean, how often, I've said this many times, how often, if you've been listening to any kind of a debate on any subject in the public arena, politics, science, philosophy, sociology, anything, how often have you heard one person say, that's an interesting point. I never thought of it that way before.
Never.
Yeah. I mean, is everybody 100% sure that they're 100% right 100% of the time? And if they are, doesn't that tell you something?
Yeah, it explains that, they just don't have all the information. They're not as educated. They're educated.
And they don't want all the information. They don't want to know anything they don't know already because they think they know it all.
this is a problem with I've talked to a couple of people that are do Black culture podcasts, and they're very against white people, at least the beginning. And I tell them, like, do you think that's just because of the life you've kind of had where you've been mistreated in a way because their parents were kind of mistreated and treated because of the race and all this? And I was like, for me though, you're talking to me as a person, you have to look at me differently from somebody else that you would stereotype. Stereotypes, we make them that way. We make race a thing. There's obviously stuff that makes us different, but at the core, we're all human. And talking to them, and they're like, I guess I never saw it from that perspective. And I'm like, it's not a perspective thing. We label things based on stuff we've heard without coming to that conclusion ourselves. I can't say anything is wrong because I haven't came to that conclusion myself. I'm not religious, but I've had a religious moment where I saw a butterfly flying across the street while I was driving. I'm being dead serious here. And it just missed the car. And I was like, that's all of us in life right now. We're just getting missed by that car and we're not even aware of our surroundings. We're just kind of floating on through life. But then I was like, I just took a really religious experience out of something that could have went the complete opposite way. If that butterfly would have just got squished by that car, I would have been like, that's life. You just get hit by the car. That's it. It's over with. But it was all in that moment, because I've talked to my friends who have had a kid or something, and they talk about like, I believe there was God. And I was like, because you saw that in something that it's yours. It's you created. It's your life too. It's a bit of you and a bit of whoever you were with. And seeing that, and it was like, whether it was their ear, whether it was their foot, whether it was this, that it had to believe that there was something else out there that could create this. That's where I say, you can't label someone else's experience as wrong. You can't label someone else's justification on anything as wrong just because you haven't gotten there yet, or you just can't get there.
Well, you also have to have, it's okay to make judgments, and we're supposed to make judgments. How can you get through life without making judgments? If somebody comes to me and says, I believe in leprechauns, I'll ask, well, why do you believe in leprechauns? I don't really expect a logical, articulate answer, but I'm willing to listen. After the conversation, I may conclude this person is living in a fantasy world.
I actually talked to a person that believes in Bigfoot, and everything I asked, he had an answer for. So I feel like that guy, he's got some belief out there.
Is it possible there's some unidentified creature wandering around in the wilderness? Well, maybe.
It got me a little bit convinced the way he was saying, like, how there's the Yeti as well, where they're both like could be the same species of hominid, just grew up in.
Well, that's what they say. But there's this conspiracy that we never went to the moon. It was all staged in a film studio.
All right.
And if you go on their website, they'll give you all of these. They've got a whole list of explanations about how, if you look at the pictures, you can see all this evidence that proves that we didn't go to the moon. But then if you investigate further, you could find there are answers to all of these objections. So their questions sound like very reasonable questions, and they are, except there are very reasonable answers to all of them.
I think, we definitely made it to the moon. I don't think we made it there as soon as we said we made it there. I honestly think that it was a bit of a propaganda act to say, hey, we made it to the moon, video, all this stuff. And then, just to get the other side to stop going there. And then we ended up making it later, based on the concept of, I've researched a lot of stuff the government has done, exposed projects when it comes to stuff back in like the 90s, where we were actually going to launch a nuclear strike called Project A119 on the moon just to test off our nuclear weapons. And everything seems like it's a giant pissing match between everybody. Everyone's got to pull out the ruler and see who's bigger. It all dives down. All the stuff with Operation Paperclip and how most of our space program came from like Nazi invention, basically. Like Werner von Braun is the reason when you think of that white space shuttle, that's all that was all through, not even to get all into Nazi Germany type stuff, but they were ahead of us at the time with at least 20 years of research. Operation Paperclip was when, I don't know if you know anything about that, but we split up Nazi scientists after we won. Russia got some, Japan got some, and then we got some. And they called it Operation Paperclip because they had documents paperclipped onto their shirt with what research facility they actually worked in. And we picked out all the ones for the space program because, we got first pick apparently. And they were all benefiting us towards helping us reach the space, because at the time we were in the space race with Russia. And they picked a lot of the biological ones, Russia did. And then Japan picked a lot of the chemical ones. So at this time, this is when Russia started actually experimenting with psychological warriors. They believed that they could train super soldiers using psychic abilities, which they ended up only doing for 2 years, and they ended up stopping. And then we actually went longer with it. There's a project called Project Stargate. It was at Fort Meade, Maryland, in right down here where I live, like an hour and a half away from me. There's a movie on it called Men Who Stare at Goats with George Clooney. So that's based on a real government project. The whole ridiculous using LSD to train people and do all this type of stuff and belief in psychological wars goes down a huge rabbit hole. And that's when I'm like, look, the government does a lot of shady stuff. People are known to do shady stuff. So I'm like, to think that we made it to the moon when we said we did and had this video of it, it's not out of the realm of possibility to say that we could have faked just the video, but then made it up there later and just didn't tell anybody the exact day.
So, there are always going to be an element of the unknown. You do your research, you investigate. It's harder to pull off deceptions on a large scale. And the more people who are involved in the project, the more difficult it is to pull the wool over people's eyes. And it also goes back to religious theology. I shouldn't say religious theology because religion is theology. Where did the theology come from? Did it come from one person in a cave having a revelation and coming out and telling everybody about it? Or did it come from a large-scale event that involved huge numbers of people? There's a difference in terms of historical credibility. And ultimately, if we want to get really into pure philosophy, ultimately we can't know anything. We don't even know if we exist. We might be figments in someone else's imagination.
Could all be part of the Matrix.
Yeah. And, and the truth is that today, people are living in their own self-made fantasy worlds. But we have to get through life. We have to make decisions. We have to make choices. And therefore, we conduct ourselves with certain axioms. I believe that my perceptions are a reasonable representation of reality. I believe that that I'm in control of my own choices, and that my choices will make a difference to some degree on the world I live in. Because if we don't do that, then we are taking no responsibility for ourselves. And we're taking no responsibility for the community that we live in. And we're also absolving ourselves of any accountability, and we're depriving ourselves
of key information.
Of information, but also of the sense of purpose that gives value to our lives. If I don't believe that my life makes a difference, then all I can do is pursue pleasure. And pursuing pleasure is not happiness. It's a distraction from unhappiness. This phrase, the pursuit of happiness, it's a beautiful phrase that Thomas Jefferson came up with, but I think it does us a disservice that when you make happiness the goal, you really miss the point of life. Happiness is a byproduct of living a purposeful, meaningful life. And the way to make life meaningful is to pursue meaning, to pursue purpose, to pursue truth and understanding and value. And that, again, takes a lot of work and a lot of effort. And in our superficial society, in our immediate gratification society, more and more people are unwilling to make that effort and do that work. And therefore, they accept very shallow substitutes and end up not experience the fullness of life. I mean, why is it that depression and suicide are on the rise, especially among young people?
Couldn't be technology, could it? Nope. Definitely not that little bastard in your pocket giving you all that wrong information you don't want.
Yeah. I mean, you know what they say, that the cell phone that we all carry in our pockets has more computing power than the Apollo spacecraft. So, you know, we should be so immensely powerful, and instead we're numbing our minds, and we're taking the thinnest, most superficial view of a world that is so rich and so deep and so stimulating and so inspiring, and we don't give ourselves the opportunity to be inspired.
Yeah, we
The opportunity to learn.
desensitize ourselves from the world when we use our phones. You know, I always bring up the question when I see someone on their phone. I'm like, you ever think the thing just gives off a little bit of radiation to your head? I mean, at the start, people were afraid to hold them up to their head because they were so big they would cause radiation. They went
Right.
from super big to super small to now super big again. Like, come on, I can't even fit it in my jeans anymore when I'm walking down the street. I got to leave my phone in the car. That's a good thing. But like, I remember I broke my phone for like 2 days. I had like 30 missed calls and like all these texts. I'm like, what happened? Nothing bad happened.
You know, life went on.
Yeah. Like I actually realized this was like around a year ago. I realized that was a problem. Every morning I was waking up, I was looking for the phone. And I was like, okay, I didn't have it for 2 days. I rarely get on it now. Sometimes I miss texts, miss calls. I'm just like, what'd you want? Like, you're downstairs. Come up and talk to me. Like it's not that hard.
Yep.
Well, hey, I mean, I appreciate you doing the podcast, man. It's been awesome talking to you. I want to give you here a minute at the end to kind of promote your stuff so people can find your awesome content.
All right. Well, I have a lot of articles, videos, podcast interviews. I gave a TED talk this summer that people could check out. I'm going to talk about the same topic you started up with, about labels, the danger of labels. And find me on my website, which is my name, Yonason Goldson, YONASON GOLDSON.com. And for anyone who wants to look further into the topics of, I focus on the topic of ethics, because ultimately ethics is about civility. Civility is the basis of civilization. The society that we live in is healthy when we recognize that we are responsible to other people and that our actions do make a difference. And so I encourage people to take a look. There's a lot of interesting and enjoyable material that I provide. And always feel free to reach out. I always like to continue the conversation.